Okay, hi everybody. So today we are going to talk about how evolution happens. We've discussed what evolution is, the evidence for it. We've discussed populations and evolution and things like the Hardy-Weinberg equation, which was crazy. So today we're going to talk about what actually causes evolution. How does it happen? So let's look at our notes. Again, you should have the notes out and be following along, writing down your own notes as we go. Okay, so first, there's 5 basic mechanisms for how evolution, change over time in a population, happens. The first is mutations, which we probably make sense, mutations that occur in the DNA. Natural selection, which works hand in hand with mutations. Gene flow, genetic drift, and non-random mating. So we're going to talk about those in a little more detail. Okay, let's start. So how do mutations and natural selection affect a population? How do they cause evolution in that population? Well, first of all, we have to remember that DNA is found in every single living thing on the planet Earth. It's in every cell. And sometimes when we're making DNA, it can mutate or change so that then when the offspring is made, they have that mutation. Now remember, DNA is what is the recipe for the amino acids or the proteins that then create things like my nose or my eye color or my hair. So mutations can help an organism to survive. And if they survive, then they're going to probably be able to reproduce more often, thereby passing on the trait to offspring, passing on that DNA through meiosis. And then we'll likely see those traits, if they're helpful, those will increase in the population. So because those traits increase, like for example, this black color of the panther here in the rainforest, let's say that allows that panther, that adaptation allows the panther to hide or camouflage better. Therefore, it's going to live longer because it can attack more prey. And then it will be able to have more babies because it's lived longer. And the babies are going to have the gene for this black fur. So we should see an increase in panthers that have black fur in the population. Okay, so that's sort of a combination of mutations that happen randomly and then natural selection, this idea that nature chooses the adaptations that are best. So again, in natural selection, we're going to see an increase in the number of individuals with a helpful trait. And again, that trait has to be helpful in its environment. For example, it would not be helpful to have black fur in the Arctic where there's snow everywhere. That doesn't make sense. That's not a helpful mutation or adaptation. The helpful adaptations are going to help them in the environment they are in. So we might see an increase in the number of individuals with that trait. We might see new species formed because of those mutations and adaptations, and we might even see some extinction of species if the mutations don't help the organism survive. Okay, so again, that's one way that we see evolution in a population. Okay, let's look at another way. Oh, before we do that, sorry. There are things that drive natural selection. So drive changes within a population in an environment. And those things are called selection pressures. They are conditions that allow natural selection to work. So for example, food availability. You might have food that is at the bottom of a flower that's really, really long. Well, the only organism that's going to be able to get down that really long flower is one that's got a really long beak to reach the bottom. So that would drive natural selection, meaning that only those birds that have long beaks will survive because they have this food source. Okay, Environmental changes, competition. Here's this picture of these two lions. Let's say that one lion is much, much larger muscle mass, that just for some reason, random mutation, it got all kinds of muscle mass. And now it's competing with this lion that doesn't have as much muscle mass. Well, the lion with the most muscle mass is going to win the most fights, therefore be able to mate more often, therefore passing on the gene for larger muscle mass. Again, these are called selection pressures. They drive evolution. Okay, what are the three types of selection pressures? First is called stabilizing. This is where you're going to see phenotypes, the things that we see, the physical in the population that are of average size. So for example, the classic one to talk about is babies, human babies. We don't want to have a baby that's 3 pounds because they're not big enough. We don't want to have a baby that's 20 pounds. That's way too big. No, thank you, please. No, we want to have babies that are about 7 pounds. That's the average. So now right in the middle, we're seeing selection pressures choosing the average size baby. That's called stabilizing. Directional is if you see evolution pushing towards one extreme. For example, like the bird beak one we just talked about. You could have bird beaks that are real little, or you could have bird beaks that are real big. Well, in this type, directional selection, the environment would be pushing all the populations towards large beaks because we have available food sources. That's again called directional. Here's our original population. Now we're going in one direction towards a larger beak. Okay? The last one is called disruptive. So disruptive is where both extremes are favored over the average. For example, if we're talking about spiders, maybe little teeny little spiders, we'll see more of those in a population because they can hide from their predators. So they hide and they survive longer. They can pass on the trait for teeny size. Or you might have a real large spider that maybe is too big for the birds to eat. And so it's, again, the extreme. So we've got the real little teeny ones, and then we've got the really big spiders. I don't like spiders. But both extremes are being selected as opposed to a medium spider that all the birds are eating. Okay, again, these are the 3 different types of evolution that we might see happening based on selection pressures in the environment. Okay, now you probably need to recognize those. Okay, next. Now, artificial selection, I just put it in here because it's kind of the opposite of natural selection. Natural selection, remember, is the environment, nature, putting pressure on a population to change based on what's best for the environment. Artificial selection is when humans get involved and we choose what traits we want expressed, whether they're helpful or not. For example, with dogs. For millions of years, humans have taken wolves at the beginning and chosen traits that they wanted. Maybe they wanted a gentler dog, so they found a wolf that was more approachable and bred that wolf with another wolf that maybe had bigger muscles, and then we got the offspring, and then they were like, oh, we like this dog or this wolf because it's gentle, and we like this wolf because it's gentle but it has big muscles, and then we bred those together, brother and sister. This is inbreeding, but we've done it for thousands and thousands of years, and for certainly we've done it when we got all these different breeds of dogs. So now we've got tiny little Chihuahuas, or we've got a big giant Great Dane. We did that through our own artificial selection, breeding for certain traits. Okay, now let's get back to our mechanisms of evolution. We talked again about natural selection and mutations. The third one I want to mention is gene flow. So gene flow basically is just migration. It's just moving. It's when you have, let's say, a population of squirrels that live over by my house, and one of those squirrels one day says, hey, I'm going to go over there by Binford. I'm going near Castleton, please. And they take off and they make their way to the population of squirrels over by Castleton Mall. And now we've had migration. They've taken their genes from this population out my window, and they've moved their genes to a new population over near Castleton. That's called gene flow. It's the movement of genes, migration, the movement from one population to another. And we would see changes because of that. We've created more genetic diversity. Okay, here's an example of migration that I think is fascinating. In the 1940s, we see this map down here on the bottom left. And this one shows skin color around the world back in 1940, so before World War II. And you can see that most people with darker skin were in Central Africa and Australia. Now, look at this map right here. This is done in 2004, so this is still kind of old, but 2004. You can see the change. People are migrating or moving, having relationships, having offspring, and they're passing on the trait for darker skin. And in fact, our world is creating humans with darker skin overall. So what's that mean? Human beings are getting darker. Yeah, that's what that shows. That's all happening through gene flow, the movement of people moving to new populations, having babies, and passing on their genetic traits. Okay, now we've talked about, again, let's review. Mutations, natural selection, gene flow, and the fourth one is genetic drift. Genetic drift. This is seen in small populations, and it is a dramatic reduction in the alleles in that gene pool. Okay, now that's a lot of words. Basically what I mean is that you have a population that's got all kinds of genetic diversity, and then something happens, and now you've got a lot less genetic diversity. Okay, there's two kinds that we're going to talk about, bottleneck effect and founder's effect. Let's look at the first one. Bottleneck effect is, again, when a population undergoes a drastic reduction in size, and it's normally due to some kind of natural disaster. So if you look at this picture here, in this bottle, we've got blue and yellow organisms. So those are the alleles, blue and yellow. They go through a bottleneck or some kind of dramatic problem, natural disaster happened, and then the surviving people or surviving organisms are a lot less than the original, less numbers. And because of that, we have less alleles, less genetic diversity. You can see there's only 2 yellow ones in there now. Now, as those start to reproduce, the population grows, but it doesn't have as much genetic diversity. There's way more blue ones in this population than yellow. Okay, so let's look at an actual example of bottleneck effect. There are these northern elephant seals that are so nasty, first of all. Let me just tell you, I shouldn't say that as a biology teacher, but the males have this real long floppy nose that goes, and they're so gross, and they fight and bite each other and cut open their faces. I just watched a documentary about it and I was grossed out. But anyway, let's pretend like we don't know all of that. Okay, so northern elephant seals in the 1890s were hunted almost to extinction by humans. People just out there I'm gonna kill that, and shooting them for no reason. They reduced them down to only 20. 20. That's not a lot, you guys. That's not much. And so if you think about that, that is very, very, very few, very, very reduced genetic variation. So the population now is being protected. We aren't just going out and killing stuff. But because they were reduced so much, the genetic variation is still low. The population has grown from that bottleneck. Remember, here it was beginning, and then it shrunk, and then now it's growing back up again. But this new population, much, much, much less genetic variation. That's the bottleneck effect, genetic drift. Okay, let's talk about founder's effect. This is the second kind of genetic drift, founder's effect. Basically, this is when, for some reason, some individuals in an original population get separated. They're separated from the original. So let's say it was something like you have a population of beetles down here. Okay, there's in this population of beetles, the original, you've got black, yellow, red with spots, yellow with spots. And then let's pretend that a rainfall happened and there's now a creek. So you have your original population over here and then the creek running, and now this other tiny little population over here. There's like, hey guys, we can't get over there anymore. They're separated. The first population that got separated has 2 black beetles and 2 beetles that are yellow with black spots, and that's it. Is that less genetic variation? Yeah, than the original. So then as this founding population grows or increases in size through reproduction, we see that their genetic diversity is much less than the original. Do you see that? Look here down at the picture. Here's my new population, my founding population after it's reproduced, just yellow and black. If you compare that back to the original population, it's got a lot less genetic variation. So we're seeing evolution happen because of this dramatic event that separated the 2 populations. Okay. Now, here's an example of founder's effect in real life. It's called polydactyly. So there were these people, or still are, Amish people that came over from Germany, from Europe in Germany, and they moved to Pennsylvania. And this population likes to stay within their religious population. Like, you don't have a boy that's like, hey, I'm going to go to New York and find my wife. I mean, that doesn't happen. They marry within the Amish community. Because of that, they are inbred. Ugh. Now, I don't mean like inbred, like marry your sister or something. Okay, no. But maybe marry a cousin. That's kind of yucky too. But if you inbreed, you have sex within close relationships, then recessive traits sometimes surface up because they're more common, they're more accessible. So this is, again, a population that maybe over in Germany there was a lot of variation, but this small group moved to the United States, and now they're inbreeding within this small population. There's less genetic variation, and so you're going to start to see these recessive traits like this picture. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 fingers. How many fingers do I have? 1, 2, 3, 4 with a thumb. Polydactyly is many fingers and then a thumb. Yeah. Okay, let's move on. Okay, 5th thing that can cause evolution, the mechanism. What causes evolution? We said mutations, natural selection, gene flow, genetic drift, and our last one, non-random mating. Basically, this just means like you make a choice about who you want to reproduce with. You're not just saying any old person can reproduce with me. You're saying, I'm going to pick who I want to have babies with. Non-random. You're choosing, mating with a choice. So sometimes we see this in birds a lot. Like you can see this bird right here. He's got all these beautiful feathers. And we're like, woo, you are so super cute. I want you to have my baby. Okay, so that is non-random. She's making the choice about who she wants to have her babies with. That causes evolution in a population because we're choosing traits that we like. These birds are choosing the traits that they like. Okay, makes sense? sometimes we don't know as observers. We don't know, well, why would you choose that bird over that bird? Or why did that lion get to have sex with that female lion as opposed to this other lion? We don't know always, but there's some reason. Okay, so let's review them. Again, these are the mechanisms of evolution. What actually causes evolution to happen? What causes change in alleles in a population over time? First, mutations, natural selection, gene flow, genetic drift, that was the bottleneck, and founder's effect, and non-random mating. Now, all of these 5 things right here have caused this huge amount of biodiversity that we see in our world, whether it's plants, bacteria, animals, humans, all of it has been caused, we think, by these 5 different mechanisms. At least this is what we know of science today. As far as we can tell, based on the experiments that we've done, the observations that we have, these are the 5 best mechanisms for supporting evolution. Okay, thanks guys. See you later.